Trump administration and his minions keep pushing past the rules, and the people around them finally start saying no? We've seen more examples of that story this week. Not just Trump versus Democrats, or what he calls fake news. Not even just the millions of never-Trumpers out there. We're talking about separation of powers in full effect. Because this week, Congress pushed back, judges pushed back, even some Republicans broke ranks with their own party. It seems more and more like the other branches are starting to wake up, and they're saying Trump's least favorite word: no. No, you can't turn the Justice Department into an ATM for cronies and corruption. They're saying you can't hand intelligence secrets over to someone just because they've been personally loyal to you. You can't send the military into a war and expect Congress to sit idly by. Or building dangerous warehouse detention camps while skipping the basic work of making it legal, safe, and functional. Because eventually, the big announcement ends. The cameras leave. The headlines are replaced by tomorrow's headlines. So let's get into it. Welcome back to The Quiet Loud. I'm DeAntony Collins. Tonight we're talking one of the most important ideas in this entire country. We're talking checks and balances. Now I'll spare you the full civics lesson, but they're the brakes, the locks. They're the backup system if we ever need it. Our separation of powers are the reason that no president, Democrat or Republican, is supposed to be able to wake up just one morning and do whatever they want. For months, everyone has been asking, what will Democrats do to fight back, to resist, to turn the tide? But it looks like they may no longer be in this fight alone, because it seems like Congress and the courts are starting to take their power back. And not because Republican senators woke up as resistance fighters one morning, and not because the courts are always perfect. The system still doesn't always work fast enough, but because the Trump administration keeps trying to steamroll the guardrails of his job. The founders didn't build a country that depends on trust in one man. They built a country where power checks power. All right, thanks for sticking with me. Please like, subscribe, comment, share, join our quiet quorum. All right, let's get into it. All right, remember the Justice Department's so-called anti-weaponization fund? All right, this is already one of the most ridiculous stories we've covered this term. Anyway, the Justice Department created a roughly $1.8 billion fund framed as a way for so-called victims of weaponized government, all right, to get compensated. We're talking about people who have gone out and did January 6th or tried some kind of election subversion thing in his name, that he will try to cover them. Or if they, he's already pardoned people. These January 6th folks we saw scaling the walls and pooping in the Capitol, he called these people hostages and victims. So of course, this is who they're talking about when they say people who have been victims of weaponized government, okay? The acting Attorney General Todd Blanche said the government should never be weaponized against any American. Now, I agree with that, all right? These words will come back to haunt him because they've been weaponizing the government all this term. And I think most people would agree with that sentence, just on its own, point blank. The government shouldn't target people unfairly. It shouldn't abuse its power or punish people because of their politics. Every reasonable person that looked at this slush fund asked the same obvious questions. Wait, who's that exactly is getting paid? Who decides who's getting paid? All right? What counts as weaponization? Will this process be transparent or will it be a secret? And who's watching the money in the meantime? All right. Well, a watchdog group asked all those questions and was so fed up by that they sued. It was CREW, Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics, arguing that the fund was illegally created and deliberately structured to operate within maximum secrecy. Then former federal judges jumped in too, 35 of them, in fact. Former federal judges asked a court to investigate possible fraud connected to a settlement behind this fund. A federal judge, Judge Brinkema, required Trump and his private lawyers to formally respond to the claims of collusive and fraudulent conduct toward the court itself. All right, she's calling this a fraud on the court. Think about that. She's looking at this and saying, all right, we're not just saying the DOJ, okay, they coming in with this settlement or whatever. We're not just taking their word for it. We're looking at self-dealing here. You can't just back off of it and say, oh, no. You're going to have to explain yourself here. What was this for? This wasn't just Democrats didn't like the policy. This was former federal judges, people who spent their careers inside this system, asking whether the court itself just got used. All right? And that's a totally different level of alarm. All right? Think about it like this. Imagine a contractor tells you that he settled a dispute fairly and equitably. All right? But it turns out that he wrote the settlement himself. He picked the paperwork and built in a secret payout for himself and his buddies. That's not a settlement, bro. That's a setup. But then, like I said, acting Attorney General Todd Blanche told Congress that the administration just wasn't going to move forward with the fund. The judge then, I guess, brought it back to court and said, all right, if you we'll dismiss this lawsuit challenging this fund as moot if you, the DOJ, would declare it in writing under threat of perjury. The judge also warned that the Justice Department's attorney shouldn't play games with the court about what was actually happening here. But do you think the DOJ went ahead and put that on paper and signed it and said, hey, we're not going to do this, or came into the court and testified and put their hand on that Bible and said, no, we're not going to move forward with this under this name or another? No. Instead, the DOJ attacked the judge and her authority. Think about that. This is exactly what checks and balances are supposed to do. You don't have to agree with every single lawsuit, love every watchdog group, or think that every judge is perfect. But if they're doing what they're supposed to do, the point is still made. So when that scrutiny happened, it shined a bright enough spotlight, and then that plan went down. The thing he wanted to do, just as it always does. He comes out with something lofty. Whenever there is major pushback, that plan does not survive. All right? That's evidence that the system can still work. But meanwhile, regular families keep hearing that there's not enough money for healthcare, for schools, housing, childcare, food assistance, basic public services. But somehow Washington found time to create a $1 billion pathway built around political grievance. That's ridiculous. So let's move over a little bit to who actually runs our national intelligence, because a housing finance guy is now in charge of our national intelligence apparatus. And Congress noticed. So let's talk about a man named Bill Pulte, because he's come up before. And this story is bigger than just his one appointment. But Trump put Bill Pulte, whose background is in housing finance, not intelligence, now for the record, into the role of acting director of national intelligence, the role that Tulsi Gabbard had vacated, who Tulsi Gabbard herself is back in the news again because apparently she is in a cult that isn't MAGA. And she has been following the teachings, the action items of who she terms her guru. And it has been shown right now that things he has told her in private, she has come out and said directly in public. And it is shown to be not only coloring her actions, but her actions seem to be a direct result of this man. All right. So not even just blindly following Trump. She is following whoever her spiritual or religious leader is in her job. That's crazy. Okay. But anyway, back to Bill Pulte as the acting DNI. Picture his appointment like this. Imagine your hospital suddenly put in a hotel manager in charge of the hospital ICU. Okay. Maybe the guy is talented. Maybe he's a fast learner. Maybe he is fantastic at running hotels. All right. That's not the real question here. The question is, why this guy for this particular thing? Because the director of national intelligence is not some ceremonial job. This is the person connected to some of the most sensitive information in the U.S. government, heading and connecting all of our 18-some intelligence apparatus in our intelligence community. For one, I think that's entirely too many. I mean, come on. You know, we're still having all kinds of weird things happening, and we have 18 different intelligence agencies. But really, this person's job is supposed to be the connector, the glue between all of these agencies. And we're talking about foreign threats and classified briefings, intelligence collection, cybersecurity, counterterrorism, you name it. National security is all up in there. This is not the place where you want the job description to be, well, he's a friend of the president. Okay? And when Congress saw that, they didn't just shrug along and lead it. The vice chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee publicly blasted this move, warning that it threatens the integrity and independence of the intelligence community. All right, two lawmakers, Senator Mark Warner and Congressman Jim Himes, one from each chamber, formally wrote to Bill Pulte warning him against using his temporary post to make any major staffing changes, specifically protecting the workforce, safeguarding classified material, and preserving records of what he does while he's in that office. And separately, Trump went ahead and derailed the confirmation process for the person who was actually supposed to step up and be confirmed to take this job permanently, leaving Bill Pulte in place amid all kinds of bipartisan confusion and concern. And now the story has escalated. Trump is reportedly blocking his own Senate Republicans from confirming the other gentleman, who is Jay Clayton, to be the permanent replacement. According to the reporting around it, the confirmation is being used as leverage in a separate fight to revive again the SAVE Act voter suppression bill. Now, let me translate that a bit for you. Bill Pulte is staying put temporarily because the confirmation process has been pulled into a SAVE Act fight. We've already seen something like this happen. Remember, they tried to attach the SAVE Act to the last DHS funding fight, and that's how we ended up with another shutdown, with the DHS TSA being shut down. When you try to attach it to a national security position as leverage for that bill, you're putting our national stability, our intelligence apparatus, lives on the line. All right. Senator Mark Warner directly confronted Bill Pulte and called him a national security threat to his face. Now, that's far from the Susan Collins concern that we normally see. All right. That's Senator Warner sounding the alarm that this arrangement is dangerous. And again, the issue is about more than just Bill Pulte. The issue is the pattern. We've seen this before. He identifies and elevates all of his loyal subjects. Okay, he lets the country absorb whatever happens next. He doesn't care about what's going on. He's told you that before. He doesn't care about Americans' financial situation as we go through this war and price hikes and gas hikes and everything else. He doesn't care about what happens next, only that his ends are achieved. That's why institutions matter, because power doesn't check itself. Power gets checked when somebody with authority says, hold on. What are you going to do with this job? Who's going to be accountable if something goes wrong? That is what oversight is for. So I'm glad that they're finally starting to wake up and take back some of their power. Okay, let's talk a little bit about more times we see when Congress says no. Okay, the Senate also voted to put limits on a war most Americans haven't even been told the full truth about. On June 23rd, the Senate passed a war powers resolution aimed at limiting Trump's ability to keep up military operations against Iran without going through Congress first. That vote was 50 to 48, with Republicans Collins, Cassidy, Murkowski, and Paul crossing the aisle to support it, and one Democrat, Fetterman, voting against it. I guess there's always a Joe Manchin, guys. I mean, what are we going to do? But this was a big deal, as it was the Senate's 10th effort to reassert congressional authority over military action involving Iran. Now, the margin was also affected by the absence of Senator Mitch McConnell. I think he would have voted also with the Democrats on this, but he was hospitalized and unable to vote. Kentucky, get yourselves together and get a new senator. But I wish McConnell, I don't wish him any poor health. I'm just saying, I think you all also think that it's time to move on. Anyway, Trump publicly blasted those Republican senators who supported that measure, calling them, of course, losers. So inventive. And that reaction tells you something really important, though, that even symbolic votes create pressure when leaders start reacting to them like that. Now, to be fair, this resolution is mostly symbolic, and it doesn't force Trump's hand in any major way. It's not going to make him do anything tomorrow, and it doesn't magically end the conflict or suddenly undo all the months of escalation between Trump and Iran or Trump and any of the other countries that he has been kind of going after. But the symbolism still matters, because the message from Congress was clear. You don't get to drift into war and call it uncheckable executive authority. Last episode, we asked if the deal was real, then why are the ships still waiting? This episode, we're asking, if the conflict is under control, then why is Congress voting to restrain the president? We're thinking about your gas tank, your grocery bill, our tax dollars, our family members that are in uniform, the economy, our stability, our future, and their chances on the ballots this fall are on the line. They know this. And that's why the Constitution did not put the power to make war entirely inside one person's power. The founders had literally just escaped the king. That's where no kings come from. Okay? They knew exactly what it looked like when one man alone decided to go to war. So they built a system where Congress has a real role in that decision. Okay? Now, over time, Congress has given away a lot of that power. But that is exactly why a vote like this matters, because when the Senate passes even a symbolic war powers resolution, that is Congress trying to take back authority. It should have never handed over in the first place. And when a president lashes out at members of his own party for supporting that limit, it shows you what it's really about. And it's not peace or strength or an Iran without nukes. It's about power, plain and simple. So why do the big Trump announcements that we hear keep falling apart? We keep seeing the exact same pattern over and over. Big announcement, big spectacle, big headlines, and even bigger tough guy language. But then reality sets in and the thing starts falling apart right in front of our very eyes. All right. We talked about that alligator Alcatraz. Even the name was built to sound tough and scary, but likely some idiot sat in a meeting and said, what's the most badass thing we can come up with, right? But this week, the facility's story changed in a big way. Every single detainee was transferred out of that Florida facility. The official reason given from the administration was hurricane season safety concerns, but immigration attorneys and advocates are pointing to the real story. The growing legal scrutiny, mounting criticisms over conditions, and increasing operational problems surrounding the facility. There had already been mounting criticisms over poor sanitation, inedible food, and limited access to their legal representation. And that is the pattern. Big posture. And then basic questions like, can people meet with a lawyer? Or is this facility even safe? Can it survive a storm? Or are the conditions humane? Who's overseeing it? Okay, where's any of the paper trail, file systems, any of that? What happens when the cameras leave this facility? Okay, none of it can seem to stand up to scrutiny at all. Now add to that the warehouse story. All right, because the Wall Street Journal is reporting that the government is scrapping most of its plans to use 7 warehouses as detention centers after running into problems with zoning, plumbing, basic infrastructure. Okay, according to that report, more than $1 billion had already been spent on vacant properties as part of this detention expansion plan. And now there's an internal investigation into how those properties got picked. Same pattern again. Big plan, big posture, and then basic questions like, does the building even actually have plumbing? Is it zoned correctly? Can people meet with a lawyer? All right. Can it survive a storm? Again, can it function as more than just a headline? That's not weakness. That's just what governing actually requires. Logistics, asking the big questions, saying the tough thing is easy. All right. But making the tough thing actually work is the hard part. And we've seen this play out before. Remember the Lincoln Memorial reflecting pool? Big patriotic renovation, big visual. Then the algae came right back, right? Remember the election integrity bill that got pitched as a big fix? Senate said no. Remember the anti-weaponization fund we just talked about? Big claim about restoring justice, right? Then judges came in, started asking questions, watchdogs sued, Congress pressed, and the Justice Department just backed away. This is not a string of random headlines. This is the Trump governing style. Big spectacle first, system second, and then reality eventually comes in, puts in the pressure, and the plan falls down by the wayside. Because governing is not the same thing as performing, as promising, as campaigning. Okay? You can rename a facility. You can put out a press release. You can create a scary nickname or announce $1 billion plan. You can even stand in front of cameras and say, we're being tough. But eventually somebody has to read that law, count that money, answer to that judge. Somebody has to ask, does this thing actually work? And when the answer is no, the headlines won't save you. All right? But it just makes the Trump administration start to wonder why people don't believe them anymore. Okay? Trust isn't a courtesy. It's something leaders have to actually earn back. I'm not saying Congress is perfect, nor am I saying the courts are perfect. Republicans who break with Trump are not suddenly heroes. Democrats haven't given us a cohesive message yet either. All right? Nothing about this situation is perfect, and the guardrails haven't always held. But where I think we can all agree is that power definitely needs limits. And when power keeps trying to escape those limits, the public starts losing trust. All right? The founders did not build a country that depends just on trusting one person. They built a country where power checks power, where Congress checks the president, where court checks the government, where elections check the politicians, the press checks the secrecy and transparency, the public checks all of it. Okay? And this week, the answer started to show up in the form of judges and watchdog groups and election officials in Congress and Senate, Democrats and Republicans, inspectors general, local government, media, the press. Not perfectly and not always fast enough, But we're starting to see that courage, that bravery, that pushback, and that matters because democracy does not survive because powerful people decided to be gentle with us and respect the norms. It survives because the system forces power to answer. And that's what we got, man. All right, this episode helped you connect any dots at all. Please do me a favor, like this video, share it with somebody who's trying to make sense of this moment without all the yelling. Okay, there's enough yelling to go around, there's enough frustration to go around, but we should still be sharing facts and sharing the same information around. Please subscribe to this channel and join our quiet quorum. So in the meantime, please do what I always ask and stay grounded, stay informed, and stay loud quietly. This is the Quiet Loud. Y'all take care.